Hi, I'm Donna Russell, Executive Producer with CBN News, talking today with you about the 6 key elements to good broadcast writing. I've been in this business for about 30 years in radio and television in various forms and fashions, most of it as a producer and reporter and a manager of some sort. So here are some tips that I learned along the way and that I think are key to good broadcast writing, no matter the format or the platform where your work will appear. Because basically, if you have good writing skills, good journalistic skills, no matter the platform, whether it's social media, a website, television, radio, etc., your work is going to shine. So let's look at these 6 key elements of good broadcast writing. The first thing, kind of what I referenced to you, is that you need to master good journalism. You need to make sure you have your facts straight. One of the old school rules of journalism is to have 2 sources. So whenever you hear about a story idea and you confirm it with a second source. You can't always do that, but at least know your sources and know where your information is coming from so that it's not something that ends up burning you in the long run. The other thing is the practice of good grammar and spelling. Even if your work is just appearing on TV, there are graphics involved, there is the closed captioning for the hearing impaired and all sorts of things that you just need to have good grammar and spelling no matter what you're doing. And then in television and in broadcast writing in particular, when you're dealing with video, however you're going to distribute it, you need to write to your video and your sound. You need to look at what you've got and write to it. The next thing that's important is nailing the hook. We call that nailing the hook. Your intro or lead is the most important part of your story. It shouldn't tell your story, but it should draw your audience in so they want to watch and learn more. But don't give away your story in the intro or the lead to it. And when writing broadcast packages, write the intro first, not last. It needs to have your first thoughts and not your last thoughts. If you write a package and you haven't written your intro, then you have lost the opportunity to build the strongest intro for your audience. And so that's very important. As a matter of fact, as a producer, I would send packages back to reporters if they did not write their intro first. I wouldn't even look at it until the intro was written. And then whenever possible in writing packages, write full circle. And what I mean by that is if you are doing a story on Sarah and Sarah's talking about what happened to her in the storm or whatever, then and she says, "You're not going to believe it, I could see God's hand all over the situation and He rescued us." And then you tell the story and then you come back and you conclude the story with Sarah talking about, you know, maybe something good that came out of the situation or whatever. That's writing full circle. And when you're telling stories about people, it's good to begin with something from them and end with something from them. It doesn't mean you can't have other things in between. And it doesn't always work out that way, but whenever you can, I really like that way of storytelling. And then the next thing, the number 3 thing for you is to remember what I was taught way back in journalism school is the 3 things that people care about. They care about their health, their heart, and their wallet. And what that means is that we care about our heart, our emotions, the things that move us, our family, our friends, our well-being, our health being our well-being and our lifestyle, and our wallet being our money, our budget, saving to send your children to college or your retirement fund, things like that. So remember health being well-being and lifestyle, heart being emotions, faith, family, country, and wallet being money, budget, family, education, providing for your family education. Those are the things that people care about. So whenever you approach a story, look at that story and say, okay, what element of those 3 will this story resonate with our audience, and bring home those ideas in the story so that people care. That is what they care about. So if you're telling them a bunch of facts or whatever, and it's not something that can resonate with them or that they care about, they're going to tune you out, and you only have a few seconds to get their attention. So remember those 3 things: health, heart, and wallet. The next thing is to stick to your main points only. I fully believe that all of us, not just our audience, but us too, can only remember a few good points in any story. So I really encourage our writers and reporters to focus on 3 main points. You can have more points in the story than that, but there need to be 3 main points in the story that you bring home to your audience. And those are the 3 takeaways that you want people to have. You want it to move them and compel them, maybe stir them to some sort of action. So whatever your 3 points are, work those through your story and stick to those. And sometimes even, repeat them if you need to, because people sometimes, they're washing dishes and they're listening to your story, or they're getting ready in the morning and they don't have your full attention. So even if it's just 3 main points, but you reiterate them, that's okay, just depending on how much time you have. But remember, stick to those. And also, when you're writing for broadcasting, you have sound. What is the most compelling sound that you can use to bring home any one of those 3 points or all 3 points? So remember that. And also remember action steps, as I mentioned earlier. There's nothing worse than to hear a story that stirs up emotion with your audience. And maybe there is an action step that they can take. Maybe they can sign a petition or take food to the food bank or whatever. Give them an action step and tell them how they can do it, so that they don't feel so helpless by the story, but that they can be a part of doing something about it if it's something where something needs to change or somebody needs help. So remember that, sticking to your main points only. The next thing would be writing the story. And this is something that I see all the time when I copy edit the work of reporters and producers, is long prepositional phrases and clauses in sentence, multiple thoughts in one sentence. You can't always get away from that, but always strive to have subject, verb, and object in your sentences, and one thought per sentence whenever possible. Good writing, especially broadcast writing, is not going to have a lot of phrases and clauses in it. You're going to have short and simple sentences. Sometimes when you're writing for other digital formats, you might have a few phrases and clauses and things like that, but the main thing is to keep to 1 point per sentence so that you're not confusing, and it's easier for you to read if you're voicing it, or for the talent to read it, and it's easier for your audience to understand. And then, you do have to have some prepositional phrases and clauses, but keep those to a minimum. And just remember to keep it simple for your audience so they can understand, because if they got to go back and listen again or read something again, you may lose them. And in TV and in broadcast writing, oftentimes they don't have the opportunity to go back and look at it a second time, so you need to make sure they got it the first time. And this is something that I preach about a lot, is knowing the difference between active and present tense. Write in active tense, not present tense, to create stronger sentences, and avoid be verbs whenever possible. What I see a lot in television news is writing in present tense to make the verb active to tell a story. And that's really poor grammar, because what you need to do is to use active verbs and not be verbs to tell your story. Now, it takes a little bit of work sometimes, because I can sit and look at something that I write and I automatically write it sometimes with a be verb. But sit there and look at it and say, how can I tell this story without using a be verb and use an active verb instead? And then you don't have to worry about present tense, past tense, and moving back and forth between those things if you just use an active verb and use your grammar correctly there. So that takes a little work and practice, but go back and copy edit yourself. And when you see yourself using a be verb, say, is there an active verb that I can put in place of this be verb? One thing that I tell people when they're writing stories is to write everything that you want to say that you think is important in the story, and then go back and copy edit yourself and mold it into those 3 main points that I talked about earlier. Because what I see with people writing is that they have all of this information. They have all of the information about the story, and the audience has none of it. So the audience doesn't know that you have this much information. But what you want to do is give them this much information that they can digest, because they can't really handle all of this. So you need to make sure that you just write it the way you think it needs to be written, and then go back, and even before you give it over to your producer, your editor, your copy editor, you copy edit yourself. You bring it down to those precise thoughts, because if you write it and get it all out there, that'll get it out of your system, and then you can look at it and you can go, oh, well, this is really repeating a thought, or this is too much information, or whatever. So keep that in mind. And then, like I said, the 3 main points, just making sure that you keep to those 3 main points. After you've written everything, bring it back around to those 3 main points. And then the 6th item is video and sound, because of course we're talking about broadcast writing. One thing that I used to always do as a reporter is whenever I would get back from shooting a story, I would go into an edit bay and I would put my video in. It was like tape video at that time. And I would just scroll through it, and I would listen to the sound again. And I would then pick out my sound bites, and then I would go and write my story based on the sound bites. Instead of trying to make what I had fit into what I wanted to say, I wrote around the video and the sound that I had. I feel like you get a stronger story that way because you're not trying to make something up, but you're letting the story tell itself. So remember to let the storyteller in your story, the one that the story is about, let them tell the story whenever possible instead of you. And that's how you can know what you've got before you start, so you can write to it. And that really makes your story easier, because if you write your story first and you don't remember what sound you have, then you go into the edit bay with a script and you don't have sound that goes with it necessarily. Another tip in the field is you can note while an interview is being recorded, and if you know it's about 5 minutes into the interview and you hear somebody say something good that you want to use, is just make a note on your notepad or whatever, and 5 minutes in, with the end cue of what the person was saying, so that you can remember to go back to it. Another thing is to use emotional sound from people over informational. If you're talking to a police officer about a shooting, they can give you the facts that it happened on 123 Elm Street at 5:10 p.m. and there were eyewitnesses who said the man pulled a gun on his wife, etc., etc. Well, that's a lot of informational sound, but the sound that you would rather use from the officer is that it was heartbreaking to see the neighbors when they saw what had happened, and they couldn't believe that it happened in the neighborhood. Just saying something that you can't say. You can say that the shooting happened at 123 Elm Street, late this evening, and Officer Jones says that it was very emotional for the whole neighborhood. Boom, there's your sound. The neighbors came out of their houses shocked and in disbelief that something like this could happen in their neighborhood. And that's the kind of thing where you let the emotion come through. And another thing is to use your video and sound creatively, and let your nat sound breathe. Or let your video, like if there's a good piece of video or a good piece of sound, don't be afraid to show off that video or show off that sound. Let it breathe, let it do its job. And that tells the story. The old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So that kind of helps tell your story. If you're telling a story about a singer-songwriter and you never show them singing a song, you've missed the best part of the story, because that's what they're all about. So make sure you let nat sound breathe, and that you use good video, and even maybe come back. I know technically you're not supposed to use the same shots of video more than once, but if there's a spectacular piece of video, there's nothing wrong with using that video early on in a tease or something like that, and then showing it again in the package, or if it was shown one way in the package, use another version of it later if it's compelling. Like if it is one of the kind, video that nobody else has, or that's so unbelievable, there's nothing wrong with, slowing it down or doing something to showcase it. And really, that is probably the most important thing as far as video and sound go. And so that kind of wraps it up. There's a lot of good things about broadcast writing that you're not going to learn until you do it. But if you keep these 6 elements in mind, and you make sure that you focus on your good journalism, your good grammar, your good spelling, your good storytelling, your good writing, keeping your intro out there, all the things, writing to your video and sound, and those sorts of things. If you do all of these things and you practice them, before long they'll become second nature, and your skill and your ability as a broadcast journalism writer will grow. Thanks so much.